You know, since I started this channel, there's one thing that really consistently makes me angry, and that's when certain space issues tend to be over-reported, over-covered, and other space missions tend to be completely ignored. And this is nowhere more apparent than this year with the missions that are going to the moon. If you were to look at any articles that happen to pop up in the various space periodicals that we have available online, you would think that Artemis 1, which you're looking at right now, would be the only mission that NASA is sending to the moon this year. Or not actually to the moon, but orbiting the moon with the Orion spacecraft. And although this is important, it is not the only mission, not by far. And as much as all of us might like to believe it, this is not happening in 2021 either. Not even close. I don't think there's a chance of it even happening in 2022. Yes, the Lunar Starship is an incredibly cool concept. Yes, I'm very excited for the future of Lunar Starship. However, there are still too many things on the docket that need to be completed for Starship before we can even think about all of the orbital refueling and everything else that is going to be required to send Lunar Starship to the moon. As a matter of fact, we haven't even seen a mock-up of Lunar Starship yet. So no, this isn't it either, as much as I would like it to be. Instead, in my opinion, the most important mission to the moon in 2021 is going to be riding aboard a very small, very humble lander that is going to be carrying an incredible amount of scientific equipment. And it's not even going to be riding on this rocket as was originally predicted and planned by this particular company. Instead, it's going to be riding on the maiden voyage of the Vulcan Centaur. And this mission, in spite of its humble origins and its relatively small size, at least in terms of the size of the vehicle that we're talking about, is incredibly important to the future of Artemis. If it does not succeed, Artemis most probably will be delayed by at least a year. What can this mission be? Well, a lot of you are probably familiar with it, but a lot of you probably aren't. And even if you are, you probably don't know all of the details associated with it. But it's Peregrine Mission One, and we're going to learn everything about this mission in great detail. And believe me, there's a lot of details about this remarkable mission. So strap yourselves in for the first commercial mission to the surface of the moon, coming up in just a few minutes. Good morning, and welcome to another episode of the Angry Astronaut, the first regular episode, the recorded episode rather, that I have done since I have finally returned home. It took 9 days for the folks in Louisiana to fix my Ford, even though I took it to a Ford dealership. They seemed really challenged by the transmission, and frankly, it still doesn't work perfectly, but it got me home, and that's the main concern that I had. So I got a lot of support from a lot of my viewers during my trip there, given the expense of the unexpected length of my stay, and I am very, very grateful for that. And in return, I was able to get a lot of additional content while I was down there, of course, taking an unexpected trip to Boca on top of some other things. So thanks for all of that. Moving on, let's talk about the moon. Let's talk about moon missions that are due to happen, not necessarily confirmed to happen, of course. Things in space tend to get delayed no matter who it is. It can be SpaceX, ULA, NASA, anybody. If it's Boeing, then it's going to be years instead of months. But still, regardless, things do tend to get delayed. But there are a number of missions scheduled for this year, and a number of them are quite important. Artemis 1 would seem to be the likely and obvious choice for the most important mission of 2021. But in my opinion, that is not the case, because there is another mission that is actually landing on the moon this year, the first of a series of commercial missions to the moon that NASA has contracted in order to act as scouting and precursors for Artemis, for manned missions to the moon, and also, I won't say colonization, but at least a permanent presence on the moon, bases on the moon. And the first of this, of course, is Peregrine Mission One. And a lot of you may be familiar with it, but a lot of you may not. And also, I suspect that a lot of you don't know everything that's involved with it. The Peregrine is not actually an exploratory, probe unto itself. It's more of a carrier. Let's talk about it as if it were a DHL truck delivering things to the moon's surface. And the reason I bring up that company instead of their more obvious competitor is because DHL is actually involved with this mission at some level, and I'll be discussing that a little bit later on. But in spite of the relatively small size of Peregrine, it's capable of carrying a hell of a lot. And there are actually a lot of missions, submissions, if you want to call it that, on board this lander. A lot of things, many of which I was not aware of. It would seem that everybody that wants to put a rover on the moon is doing so on this particular mission. There are so many different kinds of rovers and exploratory vehicles that are either being tested or used in practice on this mission, in addition to a lot of other missions that are designed to gather information about the moon, about its radiation, about its composition, and other very important things, including things that we can use on the moon, including, by the way, once again, methane. It seems as if NASA may know some things that we don't. And if this is indeed the case, of course, that's very important for Lunar Starship. But a lot of things involved in this mission. And to me, landing on the moon is more important than orbiting it. And that's why I think that this mission is more important. Now, I'm going to leave this all up to you, but let's have a look at it. So, Peregrine Mission 1 right now. Sometime in the fourth quarter of 2021, or maybe a little bit sooner, the Vulcan Centaur will set off on its maiden voyage from Cape Canaveral, carrying not a dummy cargo, but perhaps one of the most important cargoes that ULA has ever carried. Although the Vulcan already has contracts to carry important cargoes like the Sierra Nevada Dream Chaser and also a number of cargoes for the U.S. Space Force, this particular cargo is going to be a lunar lander, and not a particularly special one, at least in terms of size. But in terms of its mission, it's going to be very different indeed. What you're looking at now is not the Vulcan, but actually a different rocket that was originally intended to carry this cargo, but instead, Astrobiotic is going for the newest Vulcan rocket to carry out this mission. The lander is only 770 kilograms and is about 1.9 meters high and 2.5 meters across. It has 4 landing legs, and the main structural landing bus is composed of aluminum isogrid shear panels and aluminum honeycomb mounting surfaces, and its propulsion is provided by 5 ISE 100-667N thrusters provided by Aerojet Rocketdyne, although the overall propulsion system was designed by Dynetics, interestingly enough. The fuel is an interesting combination of monomethylhydrazine and also an oxidizer called MON25, and on top of that it has 4 sets of 345N attitude control thrusters which maintain its orientation. The overall design, even though the engines themselves are designed by Aerojet Rocketdyne, are going to be similar to what the Alpaca uses to land and maneuver, so this is kind of a dress rehearsal for Alpaca, making this mission very important right off the bat. And even before it lands, this vehicle will be testing some important technology, such as a laser retroreflector array, or LRA, that is a collection of half-inch retroreflectors, sort of a unique type of mirror used for measuring distance. This will allow the NASA to determine the exact location of the lander as it's descending, and this will also be used in conjunction with navigation Doppler LiDAR for precise velocity and range sensing, which will also determine the lander's location and its altitude, allowing NASA to set it down within meters of its intended location as opposed to kilometers in the past. During landing, Peregrine will also experiment with a device called Surface Exosphere Alterations by Landers, or SEAL, which will investigate the chemical response of the lunar regolith to the thermal, physical, and chemical disturbances generated during a landing, essentially studying the effects of a lunar plume during the landing of a larger vehicle. But this is only the beginning. Peregrine will also have a device called M-SOLO, or the Mass Spectrometer Observing Lunar Operations, which will help locate low molecular weight volatiles. In other words, things like water ice, frozen or liquid oxygen, those sorts of things that might be useful to future missions to the moon. On top of that, something called the Near Infrared Volatile Spectrometer System, or NIRVS, which measures surface and subsurface hydration, carbon dioxide, and methane, resources that could all be mined from the moon. In addition, there's the Neutron Spectrometer System, or NSS, which will also be looking for indications of water ice by measuring how much hydrogen-bearing materials are on the landing site. Now, all of this is very interesting, looking for all this water ice, because the lander is not setting down anywhere near the south pole of the moon, but rather in a place called Lacus Mortis, or the Lake of Death. Now, this is a plain of basaltic lava flows in the northeastern part of the moon's near face. Why the hell would you land here? Well, it's because NASA has found evidence of lava tubes in this region. And remember everybody talking about lava tubes on Mars possibly containing water ice and other things not easily observed on the surface? NASA believes that this is also the case in this area and wants to send the lander down as close to one of these lava tubes as possible. But even if it gets very close to a lava tube, how is it going to peer inside? It's a lander. Well, we'll get to that in just a moment. Let's venture on to lunar radiation and the experiments that they're going to use to measure this on the Peregrine. Obviously, radiation is going to be a serious consideration to anybody who visits the lunar surface in the future, so Peregrine has 2 instruments, one of which is called the Linear Energy Transfer Spectrometer, and the other one is called Neutron Measurements at the Lunar Surface, and both of these instruments are going to determine the radiation and cosmic ray levels in this region to a very precise degree. Obviously, not all radiation is bad, such as the radiation you get from photons, and hence you have the photovoltaic investigation on lunar surface, which will be a technology demonstration for advanced photovoltaic high voltage use on the lunar surface. Very advanced solar panels, in other words. Now, if you want your experiments to wander a little distance away from the rover, well, Peregrine and Astrobiotic has you taken care of there as well. They have something called a cube rover, which can carry a couple of kilograms a certain distance away from the lander in order to carry out experiments in a different location. For example, inside a lava tube. And there's a cost associated with all of this, and it may make your heart stop. It's $4.5 million per kilogram if it's being delivered on a rover, $1.2 million per kilogram if it's just being delivered to the lunar surface by the lander, and $300,000 per kilogram if it's being delivered to lunar orbit. But keep in mind, NASA is only paying Astrobiotic $79.5 million for this mission, which wouldn't even pay for the Vulcan rocket, and so they have to make up a lot of the difference in cost by charging commercial passengers as well, and they have a lot of them. As a matter of fact, they have 28 total customers, including the 14 that are being handled by NASA, so 14 other customers on top of this. And several of these private companies want to demonstrate to the world that Astrobiotic and NASA are not the only ones that can make cool little tiny rovers, such as a company called Diamond and the Yaoke Rover, and I'm probably mispronouncing that, but have a look at this thing. It's a single-axle rover that can maneuver over just about any type of terrain and survive just about any type of mishap. Equipped with an instrument pack of the customer's choosing, the Yaoke can maneuver through just about any type of lava tube or any other kind of terrain that you could imagine on the moon, and detect water, ice, or methane, or any other type of substance that you're looking for, and then transmit that information back to the Peregrine lander, which acts as a communications relay to send the information back to Earth. It's a fantastic partnership between Peregrine, Astrobiotic, and all of their customers. These customers include Atlas Space Operations, which will carry out laser communications from the Peregrine back to Earth, Memory of Mankind on the Moon from Hungary, which will send sort of a time capsule to the moon with ceramic tablets that are readable with a 10x magnifier, sort of a way of preserving human memory for billions of years to come. Astroscale, another lunar dream time capsule with messages from over 80,000 children around the world. Lunar Mission One, the first digital storage payload to the moon, containing specifics about our civilization, images, music, other things that make our civilization unique at this time and place. And then Elysium Space, which allows grieving people to send symbolic remains of their loved ones to the moon to be preserved for billions of years to come. Truly unique things on this lander. As much as I love that Japanese rover, this United Kingdom project is my favorite. From a company called Spacebit, this will be the first United Kingdom mission to the moon, and it involves something called a crawling rover, and I just love this thing. And by the way, this is not just some 3D conceptual idea here. This thing actually exists, and it's on the Peregrine rover right now, and it can send both video and LiDAR information back to the Peregrine lander and transmit that information back to Earth. And as you can see, future missions with this crawling rover, okay, they call it a walking rover, but I like crawling better, will involve the use of something called a mothership that can carry several of these rovers that will operate as a swarm, crawling inside lava tubes and other difficult to reach places on the moon in order to determine whether or not there are usable resources that we can mine, water ice to maintain permanent colonies, places on the moon that we can establish bases aside from the South Pole, which is largely what this mission is all about. And so these swarms of crawling rovers will be able to transmit their vital data back to their mothership, and that mothership will in turn transmit the data either back to Earth or to the Peregrine lander, which can in turn act as a communications relay. And in the far future, these rovers will continue to act as a vital part of establishing lunar bases. How exciting is all of this? And on something as small as the Peregrine. 28 total payloads on the Peregrine. A lander this small, this humble, in an age when we're talking about putting 100 metric tons to orbit, 100 metric tons on the moon and Mars. And yet, in my opinion, this year, it is this small lander landing this micro-miniaturized technology that is going to be the most responsible for the success or failure of our new efforts in returning to the moon. And I can't wait for it all to happen. So, first of all, quick shout out to Axiom Space. Again, I have talked about them during my live streams, but not as much, haven't talked about them at all since I visited their headquarters on a recorded video, and I certainly want to because they were very hospitable, showed me around, showed me some very interesting stuff while I was there, and also a promise when I returned to Houston of looking over their new headquarters. This is a company that's really on the move, and I feel is going to be putting up the first commercial station, at least the beginnings of it, the first modules here in the next couple of years. And of course, their first kind of scouting mission in less than a year. So all that very exciting. Thank you to Axiom. So, all of that having been said, a lot of you folks are probably wondering, okay, what's the big deal about Peregrine? I mean, Lunar Starship can set down 100 tons on the surface of the moon. Why do we care about this one lander that can set down a few hundred kilograms? It's just, night and day by comparison. Well, the answer to that question is that NASA is not going to need 100 tons in any one place on the surface of the moon for a long time. Probably not until close to the end of this decade at the earliest. And the reason I say that is because they need to scout out the surface of the moon to determine where is the best place to set up a permanent human settlement on the moon. Is it really going to be at the poles, and if so, where? But could there be other alternatives? Might there be water ice inside these lava tubes that I talked about during the video? Might there be resources that we can exploit in other places besides the lunar South Pole? All of this information needs to be gathered, and it can be gathered by something like the Peregrine and all the missions on board because of the advent of micro-miniaturized technology. You don't need to have 100 tons going down, plus over 100 tons worth of lunar starship in order to be able to accomplish all of these things. And so therefore, I feel that NASA is going to have a lot of these kinds of missions this decade before they really start graduating towards heavy lift rockets. That doesn't mean that lunar starship will have no purpose. It can certainly go on free return trajectories, like with Dear Moon, and carrying other personnel and perhaps equipment, to to be set down on the moon remotely, that sort of thing, maybe set down landers itself. There could be other purposes for Lunar Starship before that time, but really, until NASA is setting up a lot of infrastructure and a lot of facilities on the surface of the moon, the need for Lunar Starship is just not going to be there, which is one of the reasons why I predict that at the end of April, NASA is going to choose, sadly, the national team and Dynetics to move on. I really wish that they would choose SpaceX and Dynetics to work in concert with each other, but I just have a feeling it's going to be missions in accordance with what their current objectives are, what their current focus is, and that is small-scale missions to scout the lunar surface, not to establish big bases right off the bat. So as much as I don't want to see national team take one more step forward, I think that it's likely that it's going to be the two of them, Dynetics and the national team, who move on at the end of April. We will see if I am right about that, but that's my personal prediction. Okay, so all of that having been said, still, I think Peregrine, because of all the reasons that I've just stated, is very important. And yet, they are gambling, relying on an untested rocket, the Vulcan Centaur, to deliver Peregrine. Their first mission, Astrobiotic's first mission to the moon, is being delivered by a brand new rocket on its maiden flight. Why they decided to do this is an interesting question to me, and they're taking a big risk, let me tell you. It's a gamble that's very exciting, and I hope it pays off. I really do. I hope it pays off for them, and that they chose right here, because I want to see this mission succeed. I don't want to see it fail, just like anything with Starship or anything else. I'd prefer to see it succeed rather than fail. So certainly I want to see this succeed because the future of Artemis really depends on it. So when that Vulcan takes off from that launch pad in Cape Canaveral, there's going to be a hell of a lot riding on that mission, riding on that rocket, and that's going to be a very exciting moment, and I plan to be there in person. Speaking of all that, I also plan to be there in person for SN15. As I've said a couple of times in the past, I think that this is going to be a very important transition for SpaceX on the Starship. I want to go back to Boca. I could certainly use whatever support is possible. It's all in the description in different ways you can support me. Obviously, though, as I've said many times in the past, it's not your responsibility to pay my bills. So if you just throw me a like, throw me a subscribe, I'll be very, very happy. But at the same time, if you can support me in any way, this will go towards me going to see SN15. Rest assured, I will be there one way or another. So until Peregrine Mission One sets down on the lunar surface, making a giant stride towards mankind's return to the moon. This is a big moment happening this year, not sometime in the distant future, but in a few months. Until this happens, and hopefully happens successfully, I urge all of you to stay angry about space.